Hello, everybody. Welcome to Prophet's 2022 BRI launch. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. It's great to see so many friends of Prophet on this webinar. And if you've been with us before, this is our 7th year doing ratings and rankings of the most relevant brands of the US. I can guarantee you that you will see some things that you'd expect to see. You'll see Apple being at the top of every study that we've ever done at Prophet. Around relevance. You'll see some things that will surprise you. The continual fall of Amazon and Netflix. They were perennial top 5 brands our first 4 or 5 years of doing this. You'll see a few things that you didn't see coming, like Calm and Afterpay being in our top 20. And some things that totally make sense given where society is today, i.e. the continual drop of social media brands overall for the 4th straight year. With one in particular that went through a major rebrand in Q4 that is ranked way at the bottom of our list. I am lucky today to be joined by an amazing team. If we could go to the next page. So there's a big team at Prophet that has worked on the BRI this past year. But today you're going to get to hear from 3 of my incredible partners in crime, Marissa Mulvihill, Christine Brandt-Jones, and Chris Berzminski. They are the true architects of this year's study and have helped drive what I think is one of the most interesting and innovative studies we've ever done. And for the first time, we are thrilled to bring you leaders from 2 of the most relevant brands in our study, in Sony and Teladoc. And you'll hear a little later on from Stephen Fold, the SVP of Marketing from Sony Corporation of America, and Stephanie Verstraete, Chief Marketing and Engagement Officer at Teladoc. And they will share with us in a bit about how they think about building their incredible businesses and brands, and how they think about driving relevance and top and bottom line growth in their very different companies. If we go to the next page, I think it's quite obvious the objectives. We're going to go through the index, we're going to walk you through the methodology, and we're going to talk to you about the top 50 brands in this presentation, and then hear from our guest panelists. If we can go to the next page. So yeah, relevance it's a moving target. It's really continues to get defined and redefined. And if you follow Prophet, you know a lot about how we talk about relevance. We talk about relentlessly relevant. You know, those brands that are unwavering and trying to find new ways of connecting with consumers. And this year's study in particular shows that 2021, and I have to say, much like 2020, served as a platform for companies to further figure out how to connect with us as a whole person, as consumers continue to reprioritize what is most important in their lives now. And that's very different than when we first did this study 7 years ago. And as you'll see, the brands that can help to meet the prioritization or reprioritization, whether it's in hobbies, in gaming, in streaming, in fitness, or even in finding inner peace in 2021, this is definitely a brand relevance index unlike others we've seen. You can go to the next page. So for the last 7 years, we've been asked by our clients, you know, why did we create the BRI back in its beta form in 2014 and officially launched in 2015? And I always give them the same 3 reasons. First, our vice chairman, who many of you know, David Acker, had written what must have been his 20th book and probably his most seminal book called Brand Relevance, Making Competitors Irrelevant. And this was back in 2012. And the plan had always been, in working with Dave, is figuring out not just how to write this seminal book and get it out to all those that are interested, but how do we best pay off his great thinking in both the work that Prophet did with our clients and in the world, and giving the world a systematic way of thinking about how to help our clients build relentlessly relevant brands. So that was the first reason. Second reason, our clients continue to ask us, where's your study? Where's the Prophet study? They had all of these other competitive studies that were coming into them on a regular basis. And to be quite frank, they didn't really know what to do with them. And they would often ask Prophet to either create a de novo study for them or to dissect the other studies. And one of the things that they found to be challenging was to interpret some of the data and how they were ranked in those other studies and what they could do to increase, quote unquote, their rankings. And at that point, we said it's time to create our own study. It's time to create one that has only one input. It's a consumer input, something that is very telegraphic, something that is very transparent, and something that is incredibly pragmatic. And that's the journey we've been on for the last 7 years, is creating an asset that is clear on how each brand is performing against a set of attributes that Christine will take you through in a second, that drive relevance and drive ultimately, as we go to the next page, both disproportionate value relative to other brands that the brands you're about to see compete against. And on the next page, they consistently for 7 years have outpaced the growth rates of the S&P 500. So if you want to think about relevance and building brands, it's not just to get a good rating or a good ranking, it's to literally drive top and bottom line growth and outperform your competition. So with that, let me hand it over to my partner in crime, Christine, to talk a little bit about how we actually conducted the study this year.
Great, thanks, Scott. So in order to get to our results, we fielded a pretty robust study. We talked to over 13,500 consumers. We measured 293 brands in 27 categories. And we'll talk a little bit about how all that gets constructed and selected on the next slide. Thank you. So how we measure relevance. This is the most technical that we're going to get through this presentation today, I promise. So the first thing is that we have a representative sample of the US population. We balance it against the most recent census. The respondents have to be active in the category in which the brand that they are evaluating is, and they need to be considerers or users of a brand to rate it. The survey that we're presenting today was fielded in October, November 2021. The brand selection, there are 293 of them, 27 categories, and they represent a significant proportion of household spend and or time. So these are the brands we live with and that are part of our lives. 90% of the brands are selected based on their revenue size and growth. And about 10% of them come in because we want to make sure that we have a representation of potential disruptors, and also some that are held by private companies. It's very, the brands that are sort of behind the curtain, as you will, on revenue and size and growth, because they're not public. We want to make sure that they're included if they kind of pass the criteria of being an important part of our lives. So on measuring relevance, each respondent rates 5 brands on a total of 16 attributes that define brand relevance on a 1 to 7 point scale. And some of you might be saying 5 brands. Well, that's a lot. Well, we've tested to see if position, being the 4th or 5th brand rated, has any impact on ratings. It does not have a statistically or materially meaningful impact. So we're very confident that those 5 brands are each getting a fair shot at a good set of ratings on those 16 attributes. And then to compute the relevance scores, top 2 box percent was calculated for each of those 16 attributes, and then they are averaged. It's a straight average. Some of you might say, well, straight average, how did that happen? Remember, it's 293 brands across 27 categories. Some of those categories, some of them are a little bit more meaningful, some are a little bit less. In total, a straight average sort of served the field. So we felt very comfortable with a straight average there. So that's how we do it. We have a lot of analytic, this kind of a database gives us a lot of analytic power. Particularly, we have the in-year power, and then we have the over the 7 years that Scott's been talking about. And this year, we actually came up with a new perspective, a new insight on how to think about brands and their relevance in our lives. And what really relevant, potent brands need to do is speak to us both in terms of our heads and our hearts. When we think about the head, these are the brands, and you can sort of feel it. They're the ones that you really rely on. They are ruthlessly pragmatic. And now you hear some of the language from previous BRIs. Ruthlessly pragmatic, they're innovative. They go the extra mile to help simplify our lives. So a brand like Instant Pot really pops on head. They really help you just sort of get through your day. They make things simpler. They're super convenient. And that's just been a really hot brand, and you'll see that in the list when we get to our reveal. And then on the heart side, these are brands that are customer obsessed. They're full of empathy. They really understand how we live. They lean into our lives and make us happy. They inspire us. They're brands that keep their promises. And so when we see head and heart come together, those are the really superpower brands. We see brands like Apple appear in the head and the heart. What's been interesting for us, it's not necessarily equal. Some brands, even the top brands, lead with head and follow with heart. Others lead with heart and follow with head, like Pixar or Marvel, for example. And because we're super transparent about how we do this study, on the next slide, we'll show you the attributes. Head is, I know I can depend on them. They live up to their promises. They make my life easier. They're modern and in touch. And on the heart side, connects with me emotionally, makes me feel inspired, pushes the status quo. It has some energy and excitement in them, and they make me happy. So that's how that part of it works. We're pretty excited about that. It's a very elegant, simple, easy to understand way to sort of think about how brands crack the code on relevance. I'm going to turn it over to Marisa, who's going to reveal our top 50.
What everybody is excited to see, if you haven't already looked it up, our top 50 brands this year. So, one of the things we noticed immediately is kind of 8 of those top 10 brands all being in the tech space. No surprise that so many of our most relevant brands are those that are with us day in and day out, serving our needs digitally. A brand like Peloton, we know was in the news a lot recently for some supply chain challenges and leadership challenges, but ultimately consumers really saw it as an incredibly relevant brand for them, delivering great experiences, continuing to inspire and motivate them around fitness, creating communities. So, again, being a consumer-oriented study, this doesn't necessarily take into account some of that, Wall Street or media, buzz that was happening, but really what was relevant to the consumer. Others want to talk about some of the things they've seen in the top 50 that was of interest?
Well, just to add on what you're saying, Marisa, I think some other interesting facts, 8 brands out of our top 50 are net new to our study at all. So they weren't in the study in prior years. I think that's really interesting. About a third of the brands that ended up being tested out of the 293 that Christine mentioned were new as well, because we're continuing to find new brands and test new brands. But just in our top 50 alone, 8 are brand new. I thought that was really interesting. You can see some of them here, like Calm. We'll be talking about Teladoc a little bit later. CrossFit, another new brand to our top 50, and new in general. Another thing that I thought was really interesting is media and gaming. We don't see them as as one category, but if we were to combine that into kind of a super category, it makes up about a third of this page. So just think about that for a second as we're thinking about our daily life and how we interact. And if you extend that into media, gaming, and technology, because a lot of those media brands are becoming technology brands and vice versa, that ends up being about half of this page. So there's a really strong pull towards that, kind of the merging of what we used to consider as more traditional categories.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll jump into. I'm a little bit more on kind of the myth busting when you look at these top 50, and I even stretched it out to the top 100 brands. First, one of the big myths is that big box retailers are going away. And if you look at our top 50 or 60, you see Costco, you see Sephora, you see Trader Joe's, you see Sam's Club, which is new to our top 50, you see IKEA, and they all have obviously online opportunities and online experiences, but really they are all on this study, head and heart, on the heels of providing just remarkable in-store experiences and having equally remarkable online experiences. Second myth I love busting is that old brands can't make it onto the most relevant, and don't tell that to Tide or Clorox or Crest or Dove or Olay or Band-Aid or Folgers or Pampers, all within our, the top third of the most relevant brands in the US. These brands are dependable, they're indispensable, but every one of them, and I could give you countless examples, continue to innovate and launch dozens of new products and experiences every single year. And then the final myth I love to bust on this is that we tend to think that brands that are part of our everyday lives are relevant head and heart, which is counterintuitive as you go through this study. But if you think about a McDonald's or Starbucks or Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or most of the cellular carriers, they all fell into the bottom third of our index. Many, as rated by consumers, have become ubiquitous, commoditized. Even though most of us would say we can't go a day without them. And where do these brands fall apart? To the brand I just mentioned, they're lacking in two incredibly important areas. One of them makes me happy, and the other one is connects with me emotionally. And when you can't score well on either of those, that's kind of the kiss of death for any brand striving for relevance.
Okay.
I know you mentioned it, Scott, around Amazon, and I know there's a question there. So I just wanted to hit on that for a second. And what's interesting about Amazon is it's not losing relevance. It's actually staying the same. It's all of the brands ranked ahead of Amazon are increasing in relevance year over year. And so what we're seeing is that top end continuing to increase, not that Amazon is necessarily decreasing, if that helps.
So let's talk a little bit about, on the next page, some of the trends we see emerging from this data. So when we look at the brands that performed really well on both head and heart, those relentlessly relevant brands, a couple of things emerge, right? We see brands that are really making their technology human-centered, not surprisingly, winning on both head and heart. Really those that truly personalize and make that technology feel like it's truly tailored to you and your needs and enable you to live a better life are those that are really rising to the top. We also saw a whole set of brands really rising to the top who are enabling self-care, which really truly does deliver both on the needs of the head and the heart. And so we see brands like Calm, which was a new entrant to the study this year, really rising to the top as they are able to really provide both sort of that inspiration that people are looking for in their life, but also providing that mental calm. When we lean into brands and look at the brands that are more appealing specifically to the head and really winning on that part of relevance, we saw some interesting trends there too. So first, brands that are really kind of reinforcing their promise with excellent performance and really being a problem solver in your life. And we saw that really recurring a lot in kitchen, right? So interestingly, we saw Instant Pot, KitchenAid, and Dyson all sort of rising into this top 50 or shining in this top 50 because they're true problem solvers, meeting really your specific customer needs and truly delivering on their performance. We also saw an interesting trend around kind of DIY or enabling more autonomy. People really were looking for the ability to self-select, right, and self-serve. And so brands that were delivering that control and confidence over, in particular, people's financial life really were ones that shone. So Afterpay, Zelle, TurboTax, all really helping consumers self-serve in the financial space. And then finally, those brands that are really appealing to the heart or speaking to the heart. A couple of things we observed there, which was really interesting. So brands that really helped you be your own creator, right? We obviously have seen how much TikTok grew during the pandemic. Brands like Pinterest, YouTube, Etsy, really allowing people to express their creativity and tap into that self-expression, really were brands that really tapped into the heart. And then finally, the brands that in particular make magic. So again, we see a little bit of a category trend here with brands in the entertainment space or gaming space, but brands that really enabled people to escape, to enjoy, to entertain, really deliver on this attribute of makes me happy. And that notion of really being magic makers for us really were what rode these brands to the top of the charts. So as we look across all of these different brands and trends, you can see it's not necessarily always about having to deliver on everything, but understanding where your brand really can play to win, and delivering on both, you know, those kind of very functional, pragmatic, convenience oriented reliability of the head, but also, you know, finding what parts of the heart, you know, inspiring, making people happy, finding ways to enable expression or entertain are all different also pathways to winning in the heart. And in some categories, you know, that's easier to do than others. So understanding your pathway to relevance is a critical area to be thinking about.
So there's some great questions coming in the chat. One, I want to address Zelle, or more than like Venmo or PayPal, and we have Afterpay in the top 50. And what's really interesting about Zelle and Afterpay in particular, compared to their peers, Venmo and PayPal, is more how high they rank on head and how pragmatic they're seen. Whereas the Venmos and PayPals are in our study, they're just not in the top 50. They're further down, but they're a little more mediocre or in the middle of kind of both the head and the heart rankings. Whereas the Afterpay and Zelle top 2 box scores are incredibly high. In fact, they both are in the top 10 for the most pragmatic, most head ranked brands overall. So that's why they ended up in our top 50, or that's a lot of the reason their score ended up in the top 50.
Yep. And I see a question on USAA too, around sort of a brand not for me. As Christine mentioned earlier in the call, you know, the folks who are evaluating these brands are people who say, this is a brand I would consider. And so if the respondent sees USAA as a brand in their consideration set, they found it to be highly relevant. So again, it's really about how we're defining that universe of consideration that makes USAA a brand relevant to that audience. And Christine, I know we're getting a few questions just around the level of income, gender, et cetera. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, so I've been typing furiously in the chat, but I'm happy to answer it live. We can cut the data by pretty much one variable at a time, just because of the sample size per brand limits us a little bit, but we can cut by gender. We can cut to some degree by race and ethnicity, age, or income. And there's a question about sampling, bless you. So we sample and control for matching the census, not at the total US level, but at the geographic regional level. So we're pretty rigorous around ensuring that we have a representative sample. And I'm happy to take that conversation offline. But we feel very confident that we have a good cross-section of the US, including lower income groups in their right proportions.
CPG is an interesting place. There's a question about CPG brands, particularly in the top 50, as well as outside of the top 50. If we think about them, they don't all act the same. So just looking at the two in the question around Tide versus Amy's, Tide's success comes from scoring really high, again, in the pragmatic problem-solving attributes, whereas Amy's is more successful in being both high on head and heart. It's not like it's skewed one way or the other. So if we look at CPG more broadly, it's probably more fair to think of components within CPG or even the purpose-based CPG versus those that aren't. I think Amy's gets a lot of its credit for kind of the way that it goes to market around the organic side, and gets a lot of the heart ranking that maybe a Tide or some of the other more problem-solving sides of CPG don't, as you can see right next to each other. So it doesn't necessarily detract from Tide that it is so focused on head. It's just very heavily weighted on attributes such as, I know I can depend on, delivers a consistent experience and trust. Any other thoughts from our team around?
Yeah,
the
no,
top
I would just, I think Kent asked earlier, and maybe you did join late, but we did do all the social media brands, and for the most part, the ones that you think of the most, whether it's TikTok or Reddit or Zoom or Snap, Zillow, Instagram, Twitter, Yelp, Tinder, Facebook, they all fell in either the bottom third or the bottom 10%. And they lost it on both head and heart, and particularly around connects with me emotionally, makes me happy, and is a brand, unfortunately, that I could trust. And that should not surprise anybody when we're talking about security and privacy and all the things that have been going on in the social media landscape. But go back 7 years ago, a number of these brands, were in the top third, because they were just, they were finding their footing in the quote unquote social landscape, and they had a very different profile. But they've remained pretty consistently low the last 3 studies.
Yeah. And I think, we see this comment around the metaverse in the chat as well. And I think there is certainly an implication on brands as they think about how to enter the metaverse successfully, about how do they do it in a way that still feels human and connected, and does make people feel happy, and does make people feel like they're tapping into some of those human elements that are so critical to relevance. So, as Scott said, the social brands, they don't make it into the top 50. They haven't yet found a way to quite deliver on that human-centered part of technology that you see some of the other brands more successfully delivering on.
Yeah, and we do see in, we take a step back and look at the trends in the world, and how people are sort of feeling and reacting to some of the movements that we see in the business arena. And we do see some reaction to, hey, this is getting a little bit too digital. We see, spirituality coming back into play, things like calm, right? People are trying to reconnect with wellness and their sort of personal well-being, and just connect with themselves as human beings. So I think this will be an incredibly interesting thing to watch, to see how this metaverse, which is sort of artificial human, goes up against people's longing for more human connection and authenticity.
Okay. I saw some questions around head versus heart and how we think about that. We talked in the beginning a bit about the attributes that make up head versus the attributes that make up heart. Brands can be more successful at one side of that paradigm than the other. And obviously there are some that really do excel at both. But obviously the functional kind of aspects, the reliability and convenience and those aspects, while they're super critical, they can often be easier to emulate, right? And easier for other brands sometimes to knock brands down on. And so figuring out how you also find at least some aspects of the heart side that you can win on are ways to really drive greater long-term loyalty and retain that relentless relevance over time. Okay.
Great. Well, why don't we bring back our panelists, talk for a little bit, and if there's other questions that come up as you're thinking of kind of our study and the top 50 here, continue to put them in the chat and the Q&A. But I want to make sure that we definitely have plenty of time. There were questions about what are the top brands doing. So today, for the first time ever, as Scott had mentioned, we're wanted to bring together two experts from our top brands. Again, having never done this before, but wanted to reintroduce Stephen Fold, the SVP of Marketing for Sony Corp. Sony this year was 38th out of our brands. Actually, Sony had a nice increase year over year from a net score overall. And then Teladoc Health, we have Stephanie Verstraete, the Chief Marketing Engagement Officer at Teladoc Health. This is Teladoc's first year in our study overall, coming in at 21st. So want to welcome both back to the panel here, and hopefully to start answering questions that we're seeing in the chat, but just wanted to start overall high level. Again, this is a study about 2021 into 2022. So I'd love to have each of you just paint us a little bit of a landscape. What was the focus for your brand in 2021? And is that changing, or what is that changing to as we transition into 2022? Maybe Stephanie, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to. And I think, start with, we're really honored to receive this recognition from consumers, especially this year as it's our 20th anniversary for Teladoc. So particularly exciting, but there's no doubt that we've reached an inflection in the adoption curve for virtual care, right? The pandemic created this unique moment where Teladoc became relentlessly relevant, hitting both on the needs of the head and the heart, which is something that's pretty rare in healthcare. And I think it really stemmed from that being there in the moment of people's needs, when suddenly something that they'd taken for granted, which is, access to a doctor, was compromised. And fundamentally, it transformed the relationship that they had with our brand from being largely head dominated, right? One rooted in convenience and value, to increasingly meeting those needs of the heart side as we became a place that they could safely turn to, people we could speak to without leaving their home.
And Stephen, tell us a little bit about 2021 and 2020 for Sony.
Sure, and I would also like to say thank you for including us in this. And I don't think I realized it was the first year that you've had panelists, but happy to kick this off. So, first of all, for Sony, we made a significant organizational change in 2021. We now have 6 operating companies at the same level, which is very different than in the past. And we've established Sony Group Corporation as effectively the parent company. So the business today and the direction for tomorrow, for that matter, is very different than many of you and many of our brand stakeholders think of us. We are much more than the traditional electronics company that many people sort of pop in their head when they think about Sony. We are also a huge music company with Sony Music and artists like Beyonce or Harry Styles or Chainsmokers or Calvin Harris and so on. The gaming company, and PlayStation has its own independent ranking within the BRI, but obviously PlayStation is a part of Sony. And then of course our movies and television group, which creates content like Spider-Man or Uncharted, which are both very sort of hot right now. TV shows like Cobra Kai and The Crown and The Blacklist, and some great anime as well with Crunchyroll and with Funimation. So we as a company, when I say we have changed, we've really changed, and our brand identity now is actually a creative entertainment company with a solid foundation of technology. Clearly not consumer-facing words. That's inspirational from the brand team, but that is the overall identity of the organization. And our purpose and values and our direction have been updated and are very, very clear. And I'd like to think are very, very sort of modern and current for what they should be for a creative entertainment company. So what's our job? In 2021, to answer your question, we really sought to create brand stories grounded in our content that really try to explain who we are as an organization. We try to principally leverage, since we have access to this incredibly cool content, we try to access and leverage the music or the gaming or the pictures content and engage with our brand audiences, our brand targets, to tell that brand story. And 2022, I'd like to think, is a lot more of the same. We are sort of very learnings based and are always sort of have learning agendas embedded into our content creation, our audience management, and our channels. So we feel like we've done a pretty good job in 2021 interpreting all of that corporate change and telling those stories, and really are using that to launch into 2022. Our 2022 actually starts on April 1 because that's our fiscal year. So that's what my mindset is.
Oh, that's great. And certainly managing lots of brands within that. You mentioned a lot of the IP and artists. I'd love to know, do you think of brand relevance as something that you bring to building the brand? And if so, how do you ensure that it's core to how you build your brand and customer experiences? And both of you.
Stephanie, you want to go first?
Sure. I think, it's interesting as we have been digesting sort of being recognized on the list for the first time and really using the brand relevance construct to put a framework around what we are focused on from this year perspective, right? And if we think about, people naturally gravitate to Teladoc for meeting the head, right? The head needs simplification, transparency that we're providing to individuals that have been, traditionally in such a system-centric environment, making it person-centric. What's really exciting as we think about this year, as we think about looking forward, is being able to focus, right, on how we make those deeper connections to the heart as we're delivering on innovative experiences, whether that is, right, through how we engage through the brand, all the way through to effectively enabling people to make that transition from thinking about the brand from not just sick care, but also healthcare. And I think it's really transformative in how we go to market from a marketing perspective, all the way through to how we infuse that into our experiences.
That's wonderful.
Sure. And Chris, for the Sony side, I think your question in terms of brand relevance is literally at the center of what we're seeking to do from a brand team perspective, and obviously for the respective parts of our business as well. So it's interesting from a brand perspective, our KPI is we really measure our performance sort of at the intersection of brand love and brand advocacy. So we're measuring, can we actually capture the heart, so the brand love of the target audience, and can we improve that? And at the same time, can we get them to be greater levels of advocates of Sony? And if we don't score high in terms of the output of our brand activity on both of those, then we've not succeeded in our brand activities. So once again, we sort of operate at the intersection of brand love and brand advocacy. That's what we're seeking to do. And in terms of sort of tying that to the Prophet BRI, you talk about human connections of the head and the heart. And, in my mind, we need to appeal to both. The head, I think we've done a better job on historically. And I think that the BRI will show that our sort of ranking, if you would, on things like being dependable or being trustworthy or being modern, which are all attributes that I know BRI tracks and we track independently as well. And I think we do well there. But I think where we don't do as well is we need to work on being more inspirational to show how Sony supports creators. I mean, I think we'd like to think that we support creators across all of those different business lines that we talked about, but also how we understand and we meet consumer needs. And we are really tied to as I said before, our purpose and values have been updated and are very modern. I don't need to go into all the details here. And I'd like to think that if we do a good job communicating that from a brand perspective, people will feel that heart a little bit more associated with us. So we're focused on creating brand content to tell those stories, to essentially inform and update our brand target audiences.
Well, that's great. Well, and we have a lot of marketers on the call, or people who manage brands or are interested in doing that. And I think everything you just said is hopefully inspiring, and they can take away what they can do to help drive the brand, their brands forward. But I'd love to know, outside of brand and marketing, is there anything you do to help sure the brand remains relevant to those parts of either it's the organization or just other areas outside of what would be kind of the core area that manages your brands? How do you inspire the rest of your organizations?
Stephen, do you want to go
Stephanie,
first?
One more time. Might as well keep we're on a roll, so go ahead.
Sounds good. I think a couple things come to mind. First, fundamentally, the Teladoc team is so incredibly inspired by our mission for enabling all people everywhere to live their healthiest lives. So our 5,000 employees around the world are really the power users of our services. And I would tell you that as a marketer who has not spent a career in healthcare, this is unique. Getting your employees to be such power users, right? That makes them our greatest brand evangelists, right? They then are the first line of feedback that we incorporate both into the experience and into how the brand comes to life for consumers. And then I think additionally, secondly, I would say we are very intentional in keeping consumers front and center in all of our strategic conversations. And while for a lot of, direct to consumer marketers, this would sort of seem like a bit of an obvious statement. It's, as you get into a healthcare context, it's really, really important. And so, for example, we start all company meetings, all strategic meetings, whether it's an all company meeting, whether it's our board meeting, with a story from one of our members, right? And it really has a powerful impact on keeping us grounded in our brand's true north, right? Which is the experience that we're delivering, and the people that we're helping. And I think this is something that not only within healthcare, but we're defining a category, we're defining something for consumers that is new. And that's why when you hear me talk about the brand, it is inextricable from the experience today, because it is so critical to how those two things are so critical to how our brand relevance is actually still being formed for a lot of consumers.
So Stephanie, that's that story of starting all your meetings and board meetings and whatnot with a consumer story. That's amazing. That really focuses everybody on what's important, I guess. So that's great. So for Sony, brand relevance within the organization, to be straightforward, I'm from New York City and I'm straightforward. So has been a historical challenge. We've really operated historically as very separate businesses, which really, which everyone's sort of focusing on their independent activities more so than on the whole. And the brand itself, in many ways, didn't rise to the level of engaging and rallying the whole organization towards particular brand objectives. I think that we've really pivoted. I feel in my heart that we've really pivoted as a company, and the value of working together, building together, creating together has a level of support and momentum that really didn't exist just 2 or 3 years ago. We've talked about One Sony and those type of sort of getting together activities in the past, but I think that there's enough examples of the different businesses working together that there's now sort of thoughts of and calls for sort of more brand activities across. Our CEO, frankly, is our most powerful voice of the brand internally, and the clarity of brand relevance that he set forth and the way he's done it in a understandable way across our businesses and across all of the different markets that we operate in is pretty powerful, and really gives us a platform to rally behind the brand internally in a much bigger way. So I'd like to hope that maybe next year I come back and I have an anecdote as powerful as what Stephanie shared in terms of what we've done to rally the teams internally. But I think that we are, as a 75-year-old organization, we have reinvented ourselves, and now from a brand perspective, we really need to tie those different pieces together internally, so we have more than just the brand team sort of pulling and telling that story overall.
That's great and inspiring, and it's been wonderful to hear from the two of you. Congrats again on the success of the brands past year. We look forward to seeing both where Teladoc and Sony are going to go from here. Any other thoughts from the two of you, just either hearing each other speak or anything that we've said today?
I mean, I would say, I said at the very top of the call, I think before many other people joined, that that Sony has watched the BRI year over year and are always eager to see it coming out. And I think to me, it's a very practical, meaningful study that is, from our perspective, highly actionable. So we appreciate the work that you guys do, and then the separate engagements that we've had with you over time. So thanks for including me in this, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone wants to lob one over.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think, one of the things that as a brand in a nascent, what was nascent and is now what I would just sort of say is a new category. It is rare to see a study of this kind that really is able to parse out innovative new brands, traditional brands in a way that is relevant and meaningful for all of them. And so I think that's something that we've really appreciated, sort of being first time to the party, and really look forward to staying on the index.
Well, thank you. And Stephen, there was one question for you in the Q&A, if you don't mind throwing it at you, around Sony. The question, and Stephanie, love your opinion on this as well, is more about brand consistency. So within I'm going to make this question a little broader than it was asked, but within your organization, do you have any thoughts on how you help instill brand consistency, whether it's across BUs? Stephen, you started to talk about that with Sony, but Stephanie, even from your perspective at Teladoc, is there anything you do in particular to help ensure brand consistency?
I could go for a long time on this. Certainly an opportunity for us to do that more effectively. I think we've done what we can. We have different brand stakeholders here in the U.S. and in the sort of Western market that we are responsible for, because my team is responsible for the social and digital, the at Sony social and digital channels globally. And there's different interpretations sometimes from my colleagues in Tokyo. So we are working to create, I'll use Prophet's term for this, sort of middleware. You can call it a guidebook or you can call it an approach. It's something that we've done on my team for a number of years now. So we really are grounded in the brand objectives, the purpose and values, the direction, the identity, and utilize that to launch anything we're doing relative to the brand. We definitely have an opportunity to do, and I'm not talking about like a 300-page guidebook that's like all the do's and don'ts, but it's guardrails and direction and inspiration, not do's and don'ts. And I think it's incredibly important to put that together and to ground that in your core brand direction. Getting everyone to be part of that process and realize that process is about enablement and not control is a key part of it. So we're on a journey, Chris. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Thank you.
And I would
Stephanie,
just jump in.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have significantly less complexity and probably fewer colleagues to wrangle, but very similar themes. I would echo to Stephen, to what you just said. Obviously, spanning brand consistency across countries is, I think, every brand marketer's challenge, and we. Again, because I think we're smaller, we do it through people and through some similar people and processes and tools. And so we have a brand council that gets together on a quarterly basis that enables people to say, okay, I've seen the tools, I've seen sort of the documentation that you've given me, but bring forward sort of their challenges that they're seeing as it relates to applicability in their market. And that is something that we've found to be helpful on making sure that, to your point, Stephen, it's not rules, but that sort of the guidelines that we're putting out there remain fresh.
Yeah, enablement, not control.
Well, thank you again, both of you. Thanks for being a part of this inaugural panel. Again, congratulations, and we're excited to see where the brands go. I think what we're going to do is pull up the top 50 one more time and make sure we finish answering some other questions that have been in the chat, just to make sure we help round that out. Can we get that back up?
That's okay. Even without it, we can, we can start answering some questions. Lacey may get that up in a minute, but I did see a question around brand purpose as it relates to brand relevance. And Kathy, you are correct that we do sort of use has a set of beliefs and values that align with my own as a closest proxy. We also look at things like, is a brand that inspires me, as other kind of proxies for it, because most people don't actually know what a brand's purpose is, per se. So, but we do believe that, and have shown in the data, that purpose, as expressed through some of those attributes, is, a key driver of relevance. And so, we really do believe that all brands need to be purpose-led in order to be as relevant as they can be. Any other questions?
I think Lacey's been incredible answering a lot of them live in the chat.
So if there aren't any other questions, then I think that we can wrap it up. So thank you all for your participation today. Really great questions. We really enjoyed getting those questions from you and having a chance to kind of dialogue on some of those interesting insights. We really appreciate our guests today for participating and sharing all of your great stories. So thank you all. If you obviously can find all the information on our website. And if you have any additional questions, there's ways that you can reach us through that. So thank you all again.